Buddha. I've had the privilege of being here 5-6 times, and I find every time I come here, I learn more about the Arctic. And I think that when you spoke about diversity, I think that's the hallmark of the Arctic, is how diverse it is. There is no one Arctic. And Canada's Arctic is fundamentally different from the one that we've been talking about in great measure here over the past couple of days. I just kind of, for fun, looked at a community in Canada, Iqaluit, that's actually a little bit south of latitude from Buda. The temperature today was -18. So it really is quite a different place. Our Arctic is huge. Our Arctic is 4 million square kilometers, or about the size of the European Union. And in that space, which is fairly complex from a governance point of view, you have 130,000 people, or about the populations of Buda and Tromsø together. So it is, again, the governance issues, the social issues there are fundamentally different. But when preparing for this panel, I was intrigued by the locomotive reference as well, because in Canada, when you talk about the North and the Arctic, about locomotives, one of the things that comes straight to people's mind is the fact that the city of Churchill, Manitoba, is cut off from the rest of the country because the train system is down, the tracks are gone. And how do you support a community when things such as basic things such as transportation are a real challenge? And so we have to look at some of these realities in terms of the differences between the Arctic for us to put in place effective strategies to try and address what I think is the locomotive of the Arctic, and for us that is the people of the Arctic. And if you don't mind my making a comment, this is not what the Arctic looks like. I think that at least half of the population of the Arctic is missing in terms of making sure that we do bring a gender perspective to how we look at the situation. I'm a Southerner. I totally feel like an interloper when I talk about Arctic issues because I'm not from the Arctic. Yet too often policy questions that affect the people of the Arctic are made by folks like me. So that's why for me participation in this kind of event is really important to learn. But as somebody said before in the panel with the students, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth because we need to listen twice as much as we need to speak. And I think that that's fundamentally important if we're going to affect change in the North that supports the people who live in the North. And that for us is a key factor. So I was particularly pleased yesterday to listen to you, Kristen, and your focus on people and the youth, the students who spoke earlier today when they shared with us their vision of the Arctic. I was kind of partial to the group to the definition of the Arctic as a democratopolis, where governance and engagement with the populations are one that will actually drive the future for the Arctic. Too often when we do talk about the Arctic, particularly at the diplomatic level, we look at it either as a function of great power rivalries. We look at it as something that is related to potential transportation corridor. It's looked at as something that we can take resources away from the North and then use it, quite frankly, for the benefit of the South. And I think that the other way that we look at it too often, I think, is that of a park that needs to be preserved in sort of a pristine way. And I think that none of these things are sufficient. They are definitely part of the equation when we talk about the Arctic, but they're not the focal point. Again, for Canada, that focal point is its people. And Canada's relationship, particularly with northern peoples, has been conflicted over many, many years. We've had a terrible history in our relationship with Indigenous peoples. We have, over many generations, in fact, created significant damage that has affected their well-being, whether it's economic, social, cultural, political. And we, as a government, have committed ourselves to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in Canada. And the Arctic is a special place for us to do that. I think it's almost become a symbol. How we engage with the Arctic has become symbolic of how we more broadly will approach reconciliation with Indigenous peoples right across Canada. And that's why the government in the December of 2016 launched something called the Arctic Policy Framework. It was a new dialogue that was going to be launched, where we were going to engage with local populations in particular, to be a bottom-up generated approach to finding solutions to the social, economic, cultural, environmental challenges that we face in the North. And it's actually Mary Simon, I don't know if Mary is here today, but was the hero who was recognized yesterday. She had this approach called an Arctic leadership model, which recognized the complexity of the North and the governance in the North, where you don't only have the federal government or provincial and territorial governments that are involved, you have municipalities that play a key role. But in the Canadian context, Indigenous governments, one that recognize the specificity of their experiences in the North. How you integrate all of that into a comprehensive approach is what we are doing right now. The government has launched this process a little over a year ago, and we're looking forward to drawing it to a conclusion sometime this year. And again, some of the things that we've been trying to gain from there, some of the objectives are around stronger, healthier, and more prosperous communities, sustainable, diversified, and inclusive economic growth. We want to be leaders in climate change adaptation and continued protection of ecosystems and the preservation of biodiversity. We want to encourage Arctic science and Indigenous knowledge in terms of those objectives. But most of all for us, the engine of that growth, the locomotive, are the people who live there. Thank you.